you, Pinder and Jeffrey DeLeo and everyone else for having me here. It's a pleasure to meet everyone. And I have to say that Jeffrey is correct in that I go around, I do a lot of readings around the country, and it is really rare to find a house this packed that chairs have been put in the front row, people are standing, and you should realize how special it is to have a community here where you have a reading series with this much kind of wonderful traction. So it's a great pleasure. There is a chainsaw here, and I would very much love to use the chainsaw, but I'm told I probably shouldn't use the chainsaw. So instead I'm going to show you a video where I am using the chainsaw. What I will need some help with is the lights. See a few more of these. Can we get the lights now? What I wanted to give you a sense of today is the kind of wide swath of the type of creative work I try and do. And I also am wary of short attention spans because I have one. If you're like me, you go to a reading and I immediately begin wandering. Sort of like when you're driving somewhere and the windshield wipers are going and you realize you're 20 miles from where you started, but you don't know what territory you've covered. So, especially as it's lunch hour and maybe some of you are hungry, we'll see if we can work around that a bit. Okay, so let's start with, how many people have read Alice in Wonderland before, seen the movie? You know the story, right? Okay, not the Tim Burton movie, very, very bad, but okay. Took all the fun out of it. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, auto-summarized to 85 words. Alice's adventures, Alice's right foot, Esquire, with Alice's love. Poor Alice, I suppose so, said Alice. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. Alice sighed wearily. Alice asked. Alice ventured to ask. Alice was silent. Yes, shouted Alice. What for, said Alice. Alice thought to herself. No, said Alice. Alice asked. Alice went on eagerly. No, indeed, said Alice. I never thought about it, said Alice. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. Alice whispered to the Griffin. Alice's evidence. Nothing, said Alice. Everybody looked at Alice. I won't, said Alice. 85 words. You can do that too. Very easy. Take a book, and if you go to a website like Project Gutenberg, which has all sorts of e-texts that are not under copyright, paste it in the Microsoft Word and go to Tools Auto Summary. And this is a way Microsoft has developed to auto-summarize text and give you the gist of those texts, and you can choose how long you want the result to be. Sometimes you get a bunch of garbage. Sometimes you get really the essence of the entire book, as we have there. Okay. How many of you are, I should ask the question the opposite, but I'll ask it this way. How many of you use Facebook? The question used to be, how many, let's do the opposite. How many of you don't? Conscientious objection. Anybody have a Facebook account and then got rid of it after a while, right? Okay, yeah, good. You may remember a few years ago, maybe this is still happening, I have it, but I don't use it all that often. There was a lot of information about quizzes. So-and-so took the quiz, played the game, and so this is that. This is called Davis Schneiderman Took the Quiz. Davis Schneiderman took the quiz. Davis Schneiderman played the game. Davis Schneiderman took the quiz. What psychedelic era pop song crossed with a washed-up sci-fi character are you? Quiz. Answer, Tomorrow Never Knows Mr. Spock. Davis Schneiderman took the what mother sauce of classical French cuisine are you crossed with a decadent Roman emperor? Answer, Bechamel Nero. Bechamel is a gooey white sauce. Davis Schneiderman took the quiz. Davis Schneiderman played the what high school subject crossed with a native god are you when you first wake up after an all-night bender? Answer, Quetzalcoatl trigonometry. Davis Schneiderman incurred the wrath of the undead. Davis Schneiderman took the what kind of sandwich crossed with a battle from the 7 Years' War are you? Answer, Battle of the Plains of Abraham Vegan Club. Davis Schneiderman came into some money. Davis Schneiderman took the how many Facebook requests are you ignoring game? Answer, all of them. Davis Schneiderman unfriended, maybe I've unfriended you. Davis Schneiderman played the game, what unholy love child of a serial killer and doctor of the Catholic Church are you? Answer, Jeffrey Bede the Venerable Dahmer. Remember Jeffrey Dahmer, the cannibal? Davis Schneiderman played the guess which American celebrity you'd most like to kill in a fight with totem animals. Roosters, bunnies with shivs, etc. Davis scored 2,321 points by training Pikachu to stab Rush Limbaugh with a mirror shard. Just stab him. Davis Schneiderman took the quiz. What two anagrams of Barack Hussein Obama best describes your feelings on the current monetary crisis, as advertised at the front of the phone book? Answer, AAA Basic Broken Mush and AAA Kebab Richness Moo. Davis Schneiderman took the quiz. Thank you. I was reading at Notre Dame last year, and only halfway through the line about the doctor of the Catholic Church, it occurred to me that I was reading at Notre Dame. But I was already in for a penny, in for a pound, so you have to just do it. Okay, here's a short prose poem, The Baby. I have two daughters, a 4 and a 5-year-old. When my younger daughter, Callista, was about 2, I was tossing her up in the sky in the backdrop of these beautiful botanic gardens we have in Chicago, and this is that. There's another thing, too. I hate when people introduce poems, but here I am doing it because that's often longer than the poem. For a while, there was this report that red hair, any redheads in here? I can't quite see everybody. There you go. Maybe you heard this. That redheadedness was perhaps a Neanderthal trait that had come down through mating with Cro-Magnon men. Do you remember this? And it was kind of disproven. And then the idea was that, no, this isn't true, but this is not a good cold open when you're at the park with your child, because one day I was there with my children, and I saw a redheaded child, and I said to the mother, oh, that's a Neanderthal trait. Don't recommend it. Okay, The Baby. This is called The Baby. The baby flies through the air as you toss her high above the artificial lake. The bubbles floating across a concourse of sunset. Her eyes, blue puddles, topaz touched by the end of a dark matchstick. Orange Neanderthal hair crossed along the curve of your spine as you throw her. Again into the wind. She laughs, at first tentatively, then with abandon. She claps, her fingers articulate. She laughs, the hands of a clock coming together in wind, in time to the music. The baby throws you into the air, turns it back on you, smacks your gums and rubs your cheeks and tickles your chin as you fly. Again, you clap, you wave, you laugh. Again, the bubbles, obnubilated orbs, silver shivers, sunburst light show, dreamy red streaks. You laugh, the baby, you smile, the baby, you spit up, the baby, again, the baby, you spit up, the baby. Kind of about new parenthood. Thank you. All right, Blank is indeed a largely blank novel, and Upinder did a really nice job of introducing it. I'm going to read the book to you in a minute, which doesn't make sense but will once I read it to you. And it does come out in many different forms. There's an ebook variety that'll be released soon, and there's this fine art edition. The fine art edition costs $7,500. It's encased in plaster. You have to smash the plaster one time to get to a kind of wooden box which I'm hoping will have Victorian padlocks on it. You'll have a kind of skeleton key. And then you open the box and you will find the book with a recycled bamboo flash drive, which has the audio tracks from DJ Spooky, an acquaintance of mine, who did these Bach remixes that have become part of the audio for the work. Half the proceeds from the book go to benefit an arts colony that DJ Spooky is involved with on the Pacific Polynesian island of Vanuatu. There was a survivor there some years ago. And so the idea is that this indigenous culture is to some extent being westernized, being gentrified out of their spaces. And so even though this was not my intention, the blankness of it speaks to that a little bit. So what I'm going to do is read the book for you. Blank, a novel by David Schneiderman. And there's the story. Chapter 1, a character. Chapter 2, another character. Wait, it gets better.
Professor Carr, he asked if this book was going to be read, so here's your dream come true, okay?
Chapter 3, they meet. Chapter 4, an obstacle. Chapter 5, they fall in love. Very sweet. Chapter 6, they argue. You know how this goes. It's kind of your story in a lot of ways. Chapter 7, more obstacles. Chapter 8, they fall apart. Chapter 9, a character broods. Chapter 10, another character responds. Chapter 11, a character turns inward to the mind. It's kind of the philosophical section. Chapter 12, another character turns outward to the body. That's the sexy part. Chapter 13, they encounter an animal, which is true, that did happen. Chapter 14, they reunite. Chapter 15, a character sickens. Chapter 16, another character worries. Chapter 17, a character dies. Chapter 18, you die. Yeah, it involves the reader in a lot of ways. Chapter 19, I die. Chapter 20, this book. Thank you very much. I bet you didn't see it coming that you and I would die at the end. That was kind of the twist for you. Okay, I want to read a little bit from Drain, which is a novel that came out about 6-8 months before this. This is from Northwestern University Press. This is a conventional novel compared to Blank, which is conceptual. Well, this is experimental. And I was giving a talk upon the book's release maybe a year and a half ago at a big event in Chicago called Printers Row, which is sponsored by the Tribune, and it's down in the old Printers Row section of Chicago. Lots of literary folk are reading. And right before my talk, someone came up to me and said, "This sounds like an interesting novel. What's it about?" And I said, "It's about a near future where Lake Michigan empties of water. A whole bunch of disenfranchised people move in, and they begin to settle in the area. They worship a giant worm that they think is responsible for removing the water from the lake. After a period of time, a planned community corporation moves in, and it's about the conflict between these two groups." And the guy looked at me and he said, "That sounds great. Is it fiction?" I am not making that up. I kid you not. Okay, so the narrative alternates between, there's two narrators, or there's two narratives. There is this planned community corporation, and they're called the Quadrilateral Commission. Some of you will remember the Trilateral Commission from the late 1970s, kind of one of these global one world order sort of specters. And The characters there are sort of, ineffectual, but they're trying to colonize and set up these kind of planned spaces. The planned spaces are much like Disney's Celebration, Florida. Does anybody know that town? Kind of like everything is there but Mickey Mouse. It looks like the 1950s. It's kind of quite wonderful in a weird way. I don't know if you have any planned developments like that in this part of the country. We have a number of them in Chicago where I live. And kind of like Levittown, if you remember that first sort of planned, although they've advanced since then. The other narrative is about a band of quasi-terrorists named the Blackout Angels, and their leader is a woman named Dial-Up Networking. Remember Dial-Up Networking, right? And their job is to disrupt the activities of this planned community corporation. And what I'm going to read you now is a press conference that they're having to display an invention, a real invention that they developed. Okay? And this is based on a real art piece that was done in Belgium. In invention. The Blackout Angels simply love to rape, darlings. We practice a brand of extreme physicality. This is dial-up networking. Picture the Jesuits. Never knocking, they burst into convenience stores without shirts and shoes, riot squads overturning the slush machine, weighed down by crosses and cheap gold lame habits. They barge into your condo, unplug the microwave, spit into your burnt popcorn. They'll goose step into a crowded stadium, throw drunk Jansenists out on their arses, and toss mint julep Molotov cocktails spiked with battery acid. And we're 1,000 times more physical. We've constructed a machine that demonstrates our philosophy. Snarling cracks in widgets, flying iron filings, rusted spark flashes characterize Dr. Zebediah Duger's amaze-tastic, self-conflagrating shithole wonder machine, named after that quadrilateral hack himself, Zebediah Duger. Duger is the head of the kind of enemy corporation. My Blackout Angel called Number, his white boy afro teased to gargantuan radius, is the prime mover of this particular pet product. Ladies and germs, Blackout Angels at large, sympathetic funding agencies from the accursed quadrilateral bourgeoisie. When I remove this protective blanket, your sight will at first serve no discernible purpose. Do not be alarmed. Rather, let your nose astound and delight you with the putrid stink that we have successfully replicated at great cost to several of our most double secret operatives. Whoosh! The shithole wonder machine announces itself in a series of odd-toned knocks and rustling leaves, snapping cold gray, sobbing afternoon olfactory buzz, vacuum stench of new age massage parlors, plunge pools drained by a single hose channeling the sum of human experience into the wash of cilia caked with Cenozoic mucus, brimstone-flavored Gatling gun residue in a Civil War aftershock, pungent skunkweed in the fermented mash of mason jars, mold-covered molasses soaked in turpentine unearthed after 100 years, buried 6 feet under a two-way radio. This is vintage shit, Number proclaims in his dapper lab coat, still sporting a bandolier. Sniff, my pretties, and a whole new world flowers before us. Let me demonstrate the proclivities of this particular fundament machine. Now, I have to briefly explain that the real invention was a machine by a Belgian artist that you fed it food. It was kind of a robot machine. It produced feces. This is real. I'm not even. This is the reverse. Okay? Truth is stranger than fiction. He lifts a wet wad of steaming uncut feces with a rubber glove and then squeezes it. The mass forms ridges and bumping furrows as if a comb made from human bicuspids pushes through a mound of rotten compost. We gasp for breath as millions of microscopic toxins escape into the air, pollinating the bland horizon, the colorless, textureless air of your hometown. Nearly 20,000 quadrilateral settlers embossed on a grid of perfectly ordered streets and 10-year interest-only mortgages with low points offered to qualified buyers. Courier envelopes filled with welcome wagon cleaning powders run along the inseam of your trousers to wash out the fireplace smell etched deep into the shag rug. The air around the shithole wonder machine reveals a mix of fire and feces, a disclosure of brilliant odor at the fusion of earth and flame. The entire metal contraption shakes excitedly. Comrades, proclaims Number, this lump of feces will be taken into the bottom of the machine like an especially unpleasant vinegar enema and after processing in reverse, returned to its original state, a savory meal of radioactive seed-white asparagus, thick sirloin gristle cubes sauteed in port wine sauce, aluminum flambe flavored with union-made polycarbonate, and a dessert, pre-processed snack-light amalgamate bar in the shape of a chocolate dung beetle, peppered with cellophane nougat, low in carbohydrates. The machine's ferocious rear snaps to life with a gear-grinding, earth-moving monster drill, crushing diamonds into a thick paste of glittering stink, while the process flood flushes itself in reverse up the machine's rear with a soft farting sound. White noise freakouts turn to noxious gas as the foodstuffs sleuth backward and upward through the intestinal tract. Low groaning waves crumble across our stomachs, and even Number taps his steel-toed jackboot uncomfortably against the cement floor. Into the belly, the sound of acid leaking from old batteries suspends over seething lava rocks hot from igneous afterbirth. The reconstruction of the meal is a reaffirmation against your ears as the asparagus reasserts its bristling tip along the esophagus of your earlobe. Gristle cubes go tough on outside leather hides, then soft and fleshy on the inside with tender screams of knife wounds cut horizontal across the wrist, submerged in a bubbling baptismal of lemon juice washing the helix of the ear, cupping the slats of aluminum flambe unfolding up the back of the throat, then the bottom of the concha and the anti-helix of the ear, until the snack bar nougat crinkles like plastic wrap over the external auditory canal of the teeth and gums, rubbing its sugary loam on the outside of the giant lips that cover the local town until the machine eats only what we feed it, producing shit-to-order excrement. In this way, my revolutionary brethren, we can determine the composition of any consumptive byproduct and its waste material in any order, starting with bullshit and returning it to the primal state in which the quadrilateral corporation makes us eat. Number waits for applause before the splendor of the reconstructed meal, and hearing none, grabs the arms of the nearest reporter whose bloody fingers tickle the machine's rear as they enter into the asshole. Thank you. Okay, hopefully you didn't have lunch first. Sorry. All right, now is the audience participation part. I'll need a volunteer to be cut with the chain. No, okay. But I am going to move the chainsaw over here. All right, I have a rope. I'm going to clip the rope to my belt. Let's see if I can get it on there, on the carabiner. Okay, so what I need you to do, you can help me, is sort of begin to thread this a little bit. So take the rope like right here, kind of thread it over here, and when you feel like it, start to pass it back. You don't have to let out the whole 100 feet. Yeah, that's good, and pass it back. You only want maybe 2 or 3 people, and you can wind it through a little bit. You know, pass it back. There you go, right. And does this move? Yeah, okay. Okay. No, in fact, we want the chainsaw to stay away. Give me a little slack as I grab what I'm going to read. Okay. You kind of wind it through, grab it if you want. So what are we doing? We're passing a rope back and forth. Why are we doing that? Well, again, I know that it's a lot to sit through a reading, and that often people say things in readings, like when they're reading disgusting things about food, like I was. You might want to respond to, you may want to leave, and maybe you can't because you're here for a class, or maybe you want to shout something. So this is your chance to respond to the reading. Literally, as I read, you can pull on the rope to express pleasure, displeasure, satisfaction, anxiety. Yeah, kind of send it back a little bit more. Watch if you have cups or drinks you want to watch, because those are the first casualties of this. Yeah. I'd recommend you send it back because you don't want it to be too long in any one direction. This only works if you all work in concert with each other, too. And don't be afraid also to let it go if it's starting to burn your hands. I don't have gloves for everyone. And I'm gonna pull back. Maybe it's a little push and pull. I'm feeling the audience out. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, and if you want to kind of settle it around there. So everybody might want to pull a little bit to get it slightly taut, not completely, but just so just a little. Give it a pull. Okay. That's the opening jingle for the whole shtick. You missed the cue, but that's okay. And then you cut it off a little too soon, but we'll work on it. So this is another auto summary. The thing when you auto summarize a book like Alice, you get the word Alice appearing a lot, but you get other things like Griffin. I don't know how Microsoft determines that the Griffin is more important than the Mad Hatter. But this is the importance of being earnest right? Oscar Wilde. A trivial comedy for serious people by Oscar Wilde, because you're serious people, auto-summarized to 99 words, plus the addition of man-eating cannibals. And when you auto-summarize a play, what do you think you're going to get? Because what's the most pronounced feature of a play are the names of the characters repeated over and over again, okay? So here we go, ready? And you can respond. Everybody ready? Okay. Algernon, 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 fresh meat. Algernon, 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 Algernon. Now you're getting angry. Good. Jack. Me cannibal. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. You tasty. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Get in big iron soup pot. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Algernon, Jack. Cecily. Algernon, Jack. Algernon. Me adding secret spices from Orient. Jack. Algernon. Algernon, Jack. 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 Algernon. You gamey like quail. Jack. 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 Marbled fat from being too sedentary. Jack, 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 Jack. Digest you over a period of days. Jack, 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 Jack. Cecily, dried strips of jerky. Cecily, Cecily, digest you later. Cecily, Cecily, cold winter. Cecily, 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 for all of us. Cecily, Cecily, together. Thank you. Thank you very much. You can keep whatever calluses or rope burns as a souvenir of the performance today. See if I can get this off. Okay, so there wasn't really enough room in this stuffed auditorium for me to do this. Sometimes the way it really happens is people pull me up and I didn't want to step on you. I can collect that at the end if you just want to drop it. So I was doing this at the University of Central Arkansas, where I was the visiting artist in residence last spring. I'm out of breath, and that's part of the show also. And there was a very mild-mannered chair of the department there. I've forgotten his name. He was a kind of Renaissance scholar, late medieval. Bald on the top, bushy hair back here, early the mid-50s, played tennis, super mild-mannered, mellow guy. I'm in a big auditorium like this. Immediately, I start to get pulled up, so I hop over, I make a great show of it. Before long, this guy's maybe 5 rows up, and I'm right face-to-face with him in the audience. Well, this unleashed the inner beast, because the fire in this man's eyes was like, this was some sort of outlet for him that he'd been holding in. You just hold, I'll get it for you at the end, for 20 years. And finally, I realized he was going to rip my entire belt off with his Hulk-like strength that had been released by the gamma radiation of my performance. And I kind of jumped in back of him, and that took over my whole reading. That was the talk of my entire visit, is how I had released the great anger of this guy. And I don't think he's calmed down since then. I was reading very briefly at Marquette University not too long ago, and I forgot the rope. I wanted to do it. So I said, well, instead, I'll just invite people from the audience down to try and take my paper while I'm reading, or push me. And it was in a chem lab, and it was sort of like the Keystone Cops Benny Hill thing, where I was running around, people were going, it was good. Yeah, I'm going to do one more quick piece and close it out. Okay, this is the closer, and then we'll take some questions. This is called That Thing Will Never Fly. How many of you know The Spruce Goose, Howard Hughes' airplane boat? You see that movie, The Aviator? You might remember. Giant wooden boat, only flew one time, meant to be a troop transport during World War II. This is called That Thing Will Never Fly. The spruce goose is responsible for global warming. The spruce goose is always the dominant partner. The spruce goose is all in your mind. The spruce goose is sponsored by Eli Lilly. The spruce goose is the spruce goose is the spruce goose. The spruce goose is a fair weather friend. The spruce goose is armed with pepper spray. The spruce goose is for nuclear power. The spruce goose is not germophobic. The spruce goose is agoraphobic. The spruce goose is chock full of vitamins and nutrients. The spruce goose is tired of bad relationships. The spruce goose is looking for a good diet pill. The spruce goose is no longer shaving under its arms. The spruce goose is afraid of Google Earth. The spruce goose is boycotting the Rio Olympics. The spruce goose is sick of the friendly skies. The spruce goose is sure no one cares. The spruce goose is running for president. The spruce goose is voting early and often. The spruce goose is manipulating your chi. The spruce goose is affectionate like a puppy dog. The spruce goose is part of a new media paradigm. The spruce goose is blogging about its own shortcomings. The spruce goose is dousing your french fries in salt. The spruce goose is moving at the speed of wood. The spruce goose is crazy for boy bands. The spruce goose is fragmenting history. The spruce goose is actualizing the rainforest. The spruce goose is an environmental mess. The spruce goose is a poor communicator. The spruce goose is illegally dumping in the river. The spruce goose is up on cement blocks in your front yard. The spruce goose is forever 21. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm happy to take questions as the few people trickle out. If anybody has anything they want to talk about. Yeah, real loud. Yeah, go ahead.
Where do you draw your inspiration for such comical and abstract work?
Comical and abstract. That's a good question. So the question was, if you couldn't hear it, I'm still a little out of breath, which is part of the idea. Where do you draw your inspiration for such comical and abstract work? And I think, like anything, one develops over time. And when I first started performing and reading, I didn't think of it as performing. I thought of it as reading. I was much more of a conventional reader, reading to you, not really looking up. And what reminds me of that, being a department chair, is that I often have to go and visit my faculty's courses to evaluate them. And I remember how boring it often is to sit in the classroom. Right? I have very short attention span, particularly when the professor or the person speaking to you is not doing a lot to try and connect with you and communicate with you. So while I began very early on with the idea, some of this writing is very dense, particularly Drain, that if you don't get it, it's your fault, right? That's sort of, the artist who's alienated from the audience. I've really done a 180 in that over the last 15, 20 years. And I think it's my job to entertain you, for lack of a better word. If you're interested in the little bit I read from Drain, well, then you'll go and you'll read the 300-page book, and it's a completely different experience, and it's not me shouting the spruce goose at you. But I want you to leave and feel like this is not an hour of your life you'll never get back, right? So the inspiration is partially from not wanting to be the opposite, not wanting it to be kind of dull. Right? And I'm moving lately into, I'll say one more thing, where I deliberately try to tire myself out, and that rope thing makes you a little sweaty. And then I read a poem that's difficult to read anyway, because I want you to see that kind of an endurance, right? And I'm starting to think of some different endurance reading things I could do, like hold my hand over a candle while I read, right? I realize that some people think this is gimmicky, but I believe in it. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, your writing style, do you like to simplify the complicated and complicate?
I've never really thought about it that way, but yeah, maybe there's something to that. What makes you say that? Was there something?
Well, I felt like earlier you were trying to simplify the novel, etc.
Yeah.
And then maybe the spruce goose was the opposite, and trying to make it more complicated or give it more meaning than it had.
Yeah, and that I think you're right, because the spruce goose is kind of an empty signifier, right? It's just this funny-sounding word to say spruce goose. It's got that nice assonance. But yeah, the idea is that you can load anything up by this repetition by using the same poetic devices Walt Whitman used of anaphora, the repeating, and you can give a kind of rhythm and a cadence to that and fill it with whatever you want. So yeah.
I also felt the part that you read, that if you're following the story and all that, you are giving like deeper meaning than what really was there of the difference between.
Yeah. Definitely. When I write fiction, I tend to use metonymy, right? I code things that don't have any direct relation with something else through juxtaposition. So if I had my cell phone, which is off, and you were a class, and I came in on day one, and I said, did everyone do the reading for today? and I flipped open my cell phone, and you didn't do the reading, and I was disappointed. And then I came back in week 2, and I said, I hope everyone did the reading today. And you didn't, and that went on, and I got angrier and angrier. And then the last day of the semester, I'm not there, and just my cell phone is there, right? You know what that means. You've taken the cell phone, and you've given it some sort of meaning it doesn't have. And that's what I tried to do there was passages in Drain that are just collections of images that don't seem to fit necessarily on the level of meaning of what I'm talking about, but they're imagery that you just stick next to it, and that happens throughout the book to code it. Right? Yeah?
As you give these readings, how often do you think artists Hemingway display?
I don't often think about Ernest Hemingway, except when I think of him as kind of anti-Semitic, particularly in The Sun Also Rises. You know, I don't care, I guess, on some level. I think that, you know, I respect Hemingway as a writer who did what he did as a particular period, but I don't want to live in the past. I want to live in the future or the present, maybe the present future. So I'm okay with that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's hard to, you know, those are things other people say about your work, and you'd be a fool to take them too seriously, either good or bad. I had brought John Waters to Lake Forest College last spring, and he said, you know, read the good reviews twice and the bad reviews once, and then forget about them. I'm happy to hear it, but I'm not, you know, my ego's big enough already. I don't need it anymore. Yeah. Yeah, well, there was just a study I saw the other day saying that it's perhaps wrong that people learn in different ways. You know, for years we've been talking about these multiple intelligences. Some people are audio, oral learners. Some people are kinesthetic learners. There's an article done, real research was backing this, saying, not so much. Everybody can kind of, it doesn't really matter. You're going to get the same result. Nonetheless, we talk about, in the last 20, 30 years, the decentered classroom, right? Not having the students be the traditional lecture. Are you that kind of sage on the stage, or, you know, the guide on the side, to be borrowing this kind of pedagogical discourse? I think that there are real political implications to the way you teach a course and what you teach. And can you go too far and make things so gimmicky that there's no content? Probably, but if you're coming at it from a theoretical perspective and you're thinking about why you're doing things, I think the key is to give students multiple modalities and different ways of working. I'm teaching a course in the Remix workshop right now, and the assignment, along with some theoretical reading, is get a fake Twitter account. Somebody's fake Shakespeare, somebody else is fake Kim Kardashian. I don't think they're identifying as that. And 10 tweets a week, and you're graded on how many followers and retweets you get and how funny it is, right? Amass, because that's a real tangible skill, right? You should know how to do social networking, because that's probably the job you're going to get in 4 years anyway, and you should do it for fun and be able to understand what it is and play with it and link it to a larger literary tradition if you can. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Don't be shy. Yeah.
Has anyone ever purchased blank and been upset?
It's funny that you say that. Once. There's a writer for a blog called HTML Giant, a woman named Roxanne Gay, who's a really excellent writer. And she claims that she saw it at the big Association of Writing Programs conference last year, and that she didn't realize it was blank, but had heard of me and took it to her hotel room and opened it up and was surprised and confused. I don't really see how this is possible, because the book announces itself as a blank book. Anybody who would have bought it from the table of my publisher, the publisher would have said, this is a blank book, look at it. Now, there are books like Everything Men Think About Aside from Sex, and you get it from Amazon, and it's blank inside. Those are books that are jokes, right? This is meant to be conceptual art. It's funny, but it's not meant to be a joke. It's not pretending to be anything that it's not. But the whole narrative, notice you were reacting to that story, right? And I used to not read the book. What I would read instead is something like Glenn Beck has a novel. And I read excerpts of the novel, and I would pick out the really odious descriptions of women, and I would say you could buy that book, or you could buy a blank book. But I've come to understand that the blankness of it, just me doing it and pausing, that narrative has its own kind of morphological power, right? You're going through, even though it's blank, it says a lot about the way other books function. So no, I don't think there's a lot of jilted consumers, although there was this one case.
You can see in the auditorium, most of you are kind of filling in, and there's a character, there's another, they fall in love, and that kind of thing. The the phrase they used was concretization.
Yeah.
But this is an extreme example of that. It's a lot of fun to see you perform it, as you take it off the stand, and there's nothing in it, and you're like, is this a joke or what? But the performance really puts it together. And I was buying it.
Good. And please buy it on your way out. That's right. And on some level, yes, it's a book that you might think or talk more about than read, but there's a long tradition of that type of art, right? And certainly not just from me. There's thousands of people who've done those types of conceptual works. The latest issue of American Book Review, which I forgot to mention before, has a whole section on uncreative writing, which is the kind of blanket phrase for this sort of work, right, where you're doing pastiche or borrowing. And it's just another example of what a great publication American Book Review is, and I hope you're lucky enough to know that it's cool that it's here and that you can be involved in some capacity with it. It's wonderful. What else, if anything? Yeah.
Consider adding this point, saying a few unsatisfied readers, unhappy with the ending,
Well, if you get a copy, I will write that in there for you. Absolutely. Put in whatever you want. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.